Cisterna di Latina, Italy. The last week of May, 1944. A single unmarked minefield, sown by retreating German engineers across a low farm road, swallows an entire American advance in the span of one afternoon. When the smoke clears, 23 Shermans sit dead in the dirt. 7 tank destroyers join them, tracks blown off, bogies shattered, hulls intact, engines fine, guns perfect, but the machines aren't going anywhere. Now watch the man who crawls toward the nearest one. He's an ordnance mechanic with the 1st Armored Division's Maintenance Battalion. He has a wrench. He has a spare track block. He knows with absolute certainty that he could splice that broken track and have this tank rolling again in 40 minutes flat. He is 15 feet from doing it, and he does not. Instead, he hooks a cable to the tow lugs, signals the recovery crew, and walks away. Because he has an order, not a suggestion. An order written in black ink in the field manual every ordnance officer carried. You do not repair a tank at the front. You drag it back, you fix it somewhere else, or you don't fix it here at all. Stop and sit with how insane that sounds. The most powerful industrial army on earth told its mechanics that the one thing they must never do is fix a broken tank on the spot. The Germans, 50 miles away, were doing the exact opposite. And they were the ones losing their armor on the roadside. How does a rule that sounds like sabotage become the reason you win? The answer is that the Americans had done something no other army in the war fully managed. They had cut the entire war into zones. The U.S. Army ran tank maintenance on 5 echelons, 5 layers, each one defined by one brutal variable: how far you stand from the enemy's guns. At the very front sat the 1st and 2nd echelons, the tank crews themselves and the unit mechanics riding with them. Their job was deliberately, almost insultingly small. Tighten what's loose, swap a road wheel, change the oil, recover the dead and the wounded machines, and then stop. Anything bigger, anything that meant a man on his back under a hull for 2 hours, was forbidden this close to the line. Pull back a few miles and you reach the 3rd echelon, medium maintenance. The units stitched directly to the fighting divisions. This was where real repair began. Behind that, at the field army level, sat the 4th echelon, heavy maintenance. The place transmissions and final drives got rebuilt. And furthest of all, the 5th echelon, base shop maintenance. Not a workshop in any soldierly sense, a factory. Whole vehicles torn down to the frame and built back up. Major assemblies remanufactured, tanks reborn. Here is the logic that made the forward repair ban not just defensible, but genius. The Americans had quietly decided that the most valuable thing on the battlefield was not the tank. It was the trained mechanic. A Sherman could roll off a line in Detroit in a matter of hours. A man who could diagnose a seized differential by ear took years to make and could not be replaced by a purchase order. Put that man on his back under a tank within rifle range, and a single mortar round erases something the entire production system cannot reprint. So the doctrine was cold and clear. The mechanic is the asset. Protect the asset. Move the broken machine to the man, never the man to the broken machine. Every echelon was a station on an assembly line that ran backward, away from the guns. A tank moving rearward through 5 tightening rings of capability until it reached a place safe enough and equipped enough to bring it back to life. The German mechanic, by contrast, fixed his tank wherever it died. It looked like courage. It looked like dedication. The Americans had decided it was simply a man standing in the wrong zone, and they had built an entire war around making sure their own men never had to. To understand how a tank actually got dragged out of that minefield, you have to meet the strangest vehicle in the American arsenal, a tank with a wooden gun. Picture the moment from the German side, because it happened more than once and it never stopped being strange to the men who saw it. A Sherman sits dead in a field, throwing smoke. The American line has pulled back, and then, grinding up toward the wreck, comes another tank. Same hull, same tracks, same long gun barrel pointed forward. A German anti-tank gunner 1,000 meters off lines up the shot, finger on the trigger, waiting for the thing to turn its turret. The turret never turns, because there is no turret. And that gun, that long menacing barrel aimed straight ahead, is a piece of painted wood. This was the M31. Officially, the tank recovery vehicle, T2. To the men who drove it, just the retriever. And it is one of the most quietly brilliant machines America put on the battlefield, precisely because it was never meant to fight at all. Here is what the Ordnance Department did. They took the M3 Lee, the tall, slab-sided medium tank already being shoved aside by the Sherman, and they gutted it. Out came the 75mm gun in the hull sponson. Out came the 37mm gun up top. Out came the turret basket, the ammunition racks, the entire apparatus of killing. In its place went a 30-ton boom, a winch, and the heavy rigging of rescue. Then, in a touch that tells you everything about how these men thought, they bolted a fake gun where the real one had been. A wooden dummy barrel, shaped and painted to read at distance as a working tank. The deception was not decoration. It was survival math. A recovery vehicle does its job in the worst possible place, out in the open, next to a casualty, in full view of the people who made the casualty. An enemy gunner who recognizes a defenseless retriever fires without hesitation. An enemy gunner who sees what looks like a combat tank hesitates, calculates, waits for the turret to threaten him. That half second of doubt, bought with a plank of painted wood, was sometimes the difference between a crew that drove home and a crew that didn't. 805 of these machines were built, converting existing M3 hulls at the Baldwin Locomotive Works starting in October of 1942. Baldwin had spent decades building railroad engines. Now the same plant was turning obsolete tanks into the vehicles that would haul other tanks back from death. There is a whole American century compressed in that single fact. A locomotive works retooling to manufacture rescue. Look at where they served, and you stop seeing a footnote and start seeing the spine of an army. The 752nd Tank Battalion, fighting up the Italian boot, carried 6 T2 retrievers on its rolls, including one assigned to the light tank company because even the lightest machines broke and needed dragging. One of those retrievers wore the name Big Weldon, marked B-18, the recovery vehicle of Company B. Think about a crew naming the thing. You name a horse. You name a tank you trust. These men named the unglamorous wrecker that came for them on their worst day, and that tells you exactly how much it mattered. Now, connect it back to the order from the first chapter. The rules said the forward mechanic must never repair the tank where it died. He must drag it back. But a rule like that is worthless, suicidal even, unless something exists to do the dragging. You cannot tell a man to abandon a 40-minute field repair and evacuate instead if there is no vehicle on Earth capable of evacuating under fire. The ban and the retriever were two halves of one idea. The doctrine said, move the machine, not the man. The M31 was the machine that made moving possible, and it could move almost anything. That 30-ton boom could hoist an engine clean out of a Sherman's rear deck. The winch could drag a mired tank out of a ditch that had swallowed it to the sponsons. It could lift a shattered bogie, pull a track, haul a dead hull onto a flatbed. It was a mobile crane wearing armor and a wooden disguise, and every armored division had them threaded through its formations like a circulatory system. The retriever pulled the broken tank off the line, but it didn't fix anything. It only carried the dead machine to the place where the real work happened, back where the guns couldn't reach. And that place, a muddy field beside a railroad siding, was where America turned wreckage into a production line. Follow the dead Sherman. Not the crew. They've been taken care of, for better or worse. Follow the machine. The retriever has it now, dragging it rearward on a tow bar or hauled up onto a transporter, grinding away from the guns toward a place the soldiers called the VCP, the Vehicle Collecting Point. And the first thing you need to understand about that place is where they chose to put it. They put it by the railroad. As the Allies pushed up and east out of Normandy through 1944, a pattern hardened into routine. Broken tanks, broken trucks, broken guns were funneled first to primary assembly points, and those points were not picked at random. They were railroad sidings, paved highway junctions, crossroads with hard standing and a rail spur running through. Demined first, swept clean of unexploded ordnance, and only then opened for business. The location was the whole strategy in miniature. You don't haul 50 tons of crippled steel to a place you then have to carry the parts to. You haul it to where the trains already run, where the spares already arrive, where a repaired tank can roll straight back onto the road that feeds the front. This is what the forward repair band was actually buying. Not the absence of repair, the concentration of it. Every wrench turn the frontline mechanic was forbidden to make got made here instead, in a place with light, with stock, with trains, and with no one shooting at the man holding the tool. Now walk into the VCP itself and brace, because the ledger of this place is grim before it is brilliant. The tanks coming in are not abstractions. Maintenance crews had to climb inside holes that had been penetrated, and what they found inside they had to clean out before any repair could begin. The human cost of the crew that had been in there. Body parts and identification tags were gathered and turned over to Graves registration. Strong detergent and disinfectant went in before any man with a wrench did. I'm not going to dwell on it, but I won't pretend the assembly line ran on clean steel. It ran on tanks that men had died inside, made ready again by other men who had to face that first. Then the sorting began, and the sorting is where the genius lives. At the end of each day, a list was drawn up of every vehicle in the VCP and every job it needed. Alongside it ran a second list. The machines judged damaged beyond repair. But beyond repair did not mean worthless. It meant the opposite. Those hulls became the supply. They were cannibalized, stripped methodically for every usable part. A transmission here, a final drive there, road wheels, optics, hatches, a turret ring still true. A tank too far gone to live became the organ donor that brought 3 others back. The dead fed the living, and the bookkeeping made it deliberate instead of desperate. Picture the flow of it. A retriever drags in a Sherman with a blown track and a cracked final drive. 20 feet away sits another Sherman, burned out, written off. But its final drive is sound. The crews pull the good assembly from the dead machine and bolt it into the salvageable one. By the logic of the German workshop, this is unthinkable. Their parts were hand-fitted to one specific tank and one only. By the logic of the American VCP, it's just Tuesday. Every Sherman's parts fit every other Sherman, so the collecting point wasn't a graveyard. It was a parts warehouse that happened to be made of tanks. The men running this were ordinary in the most American way possible. former garage mechanics, farm kids who'd grown up keeping a tractor alive through a harvest. The 33rd Maintenance, supporting the armored advance, stood up its collecting points and went to work turning the day's wreckage into next week's combat strength. Not heroes in turrets, men with grease under their nails and a clipboard, running a backward assembly line where the raw material arrived on tow bars and the finished product drove itself away. And every one of those revived tanks existed because somewhere up at the front, a mechanic had obeyed an order that felt like betrayal, had refused to fix the tank where it fell, and sent it here instead. The Germans could not build this, not because they lacked the skill, because they had built their war to run in the opposite direction, away from the front and far too far. Here is a number that should not be possible. When an American tank needed serious work, it traveled rearward to find it. 30 miles, maybe 50, back to the division's maintenance battalion. When a German tank needed the same class of work, the distance it had to travel was measured not in tens of miles, but in hundreds. In the worst cases, the repair waiting for that tank was not behind the lines at all. It was in Germany, the actual country, hundreds of kilometers from the mud the tank had broken down in. Sit with that gap. 50 miles against 500. That is not a difference in effort or courage or skill. That is a difference in geography. And the German geography of repair was lost on a drawing board years before the tank ever rolled. To see how it happened, you have to go back to how the German system was designed to work in the first place. Because on paper, it was not stupid. It was centralized. The doctrine held that most serious tank repair, the heavy jobs, the rebuilds, the major assemblies, should be performed in what the planners called the zone of the interior, meaning the homeland. The idea was tidy. Concentrate the skilled labor, the machine tools, and the spare parts stocks deep in the rear where they were safe and efficient, and cycle worn tanks back to them. Send the machine home, fix it properly, send it out again. And then they invaded the Soviet Union, and the tidy idea met the actual map. The plan for the East assumed a short war. The military and political leadership both expected the campaign to reach its climax in the autumn of 1941 and most of the armored force to roll back into Germany before winter. The maintenance system was built on that assumption. Tanks would break, yes, but they'd be withdrawn, sent home, rehabilitated in comfortable rear areas, and returned. No one planned for armor that had to keep fighting 1,000 kilometers from any proper shop through a winter nobody had budgeted for, across distances that swallowed every assumption whole. When the short war refused to end, the centralized system collapsed under its own logic. Once operations were genuinely underway, the need for maintenance installations and the demand for spare parts increased by leaps, far past anything the homeland-based model could feed across that much distance. A tank that broke down deep in the East could not simply be trucked back to the Reich. The road was too long, the transport too scarce, the front too hungry to spare the machine for the journey. So the tank waited. And a tank waiting for parts that have to travel 1,000 kilometers is, for all practical purposes, a dead tank with good posture. The Germans saw the problem and tried to patch it. Each of the 3 army groups in the Russian theater was eventually to get its own spare parts depot. Better maintenance vehicles, better recovery equipment, better shop gear were pushed forward to the field units. They were trying mid-war to drag repair capability closer to the fighting. But you cannot improvise in 1942 the thing the Americans had spent decades building into doctrine, a layered system where every echelon sat at a deliberate, survivable distance from the guns, close enough to be fast and far enough to be safe.